a literal storm, comes upon the disciples. And Mark 4, 35 through 41, 35 says, the, that day when evening came, he said to his disciples, "Let us go over to the other side." Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along, just as he was in the boat. And there were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and waves broke out over the boat, so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." And I always thought this was kind of a neat passage. And here Jesus has been teaching all day, doing ministry, healing people, doing whatever all day long, and he wants to get away from the crowd, and he wants to get away and rest, and so he tells his disciples, let's get in the boat and let's go over to the other side of the sea here to get away, and so they started off, and he goes to sleep, and this storm comes, and it's on the Sea of Galilee, and it says that storms come up like this pretty often, but a storm comes up on them, and it's a pretty bad storm. You remember these disciples, and we don't know exactly what disciples were there, but they were, a lot of them were seasoned fishermen, and they were used to storms, and they'd been through a lot of storms in their life, I'm sure, and but this one scared them. They thought they were going to die, and sometimes that's how storms come up on us, suddenly, and sometimes we can see them coming, but sometimes they just come up on us suddenly, and it's significant to me that Jesus is asleep during all this. He's up asleep during, this is a storm that's getting ready to kill everybody and getting ready to swamp the boat, and he's up there asleep, doesn't even wake up. And Proverbs 3:24 says, sleep of a believer will be sweet and peaceful, because he knows the Lord's with him. And Jesus sleeps right through this storm. And I always notice any time in the Bible that you ever notice that Jesus is never in a hurry. He's never rushed. He's never worried about anything. And here, with everybody, all the disciples there were scared to death, and that he can just sleep, and he doesn't ever worry about anything, and 90% of the stuff we worry about never even happens, and the storms that we think are going to happen, a lot of times we bring a lot of stuff on ourselves that we worry about things that don't even happen. But I think it's it just kind of catches my attention that he sleeps through this storm, and I'm kind of that way. If a storm comes, I'm not scared of storms. There's been one or two storms in my life that I really was kind of afraid, and we never go to the cellar, and if a storm comes at night, half the time I don't even know. I don't even wake up, and so it just. But a lot of people, when a storm's coming, they'll stay up all night. They're worried to death, and they're watching the news and watching the TV, and I just go to sleep, and I very seldom do I pay attention to what storms are doing. But the weathermen and stuff they've about got us half scared to where. Anytime a storm's coming, it's the end of the world. It's a big storm, and everybody's just glued to the TV. And like I always say, a weatherman is they're about the only people I know that can be wrong 50% of the time to keep their job. You know, I mean, they're wrong all the time. but but you know, but Jesus is he's at peace, and he knows that the Lord's with him, and he's not ever worried about anything. And you know, even when they're trying to kill him, you know, Jesus, he never breaks and runs and tries to get away from anybody. He just slips away in the crowd, and he just, you know, it always catches my attention how he never is stirred up about anything, and you know, you know, that's how we need to be a lot, I think. But it seems like sometimes when I'm going through a storm, or when we're going through a storm, I'm just like those disciples. A lot of times I'll think, you know, you know, I'll pray about something, and something serious is going on, and I'll think, God, you know, God, do you see what's going on here? Well, you know, I'm just like them. Just wake up. You know, look at what's going on. Help me. You know, and you know, I can see where the disciples are coming from, but because I'm just like that sometimes. You know, it seems like that God doesn't know what you know. I don't think He knows what I'm going through sometimes, and a lot of times, you know, we look for answers. You know, God, you know, God's ways and thoughts aren't our thoughts and ways, and you know, a lot of times we think that He ought to fix it a certain way, and you know, that's not God's will, and you know, sometimes we go through storms for a reason, but you know, when the disciples finally do wake Him up, I kind of think it's funny. You know, they're almost like, to me, it's almost like they're getting on to Him a little bit. They wake Him up, and they you know, they're kind of like, you know, in verse 38, they, you know, they're like, Master, do you not care that we're perishing? You know, do you not see that we're getting ready to drown? You know, they're kind of getting on to Him a little bit. To me, that's kind of the way I read it anyway. And then, you know, in verse 40, you know, He'll say, you know, have you still not got any faith? And you know, the disciples their lack of faith reminds us that, you know, even though that, you know, they lived with Jesus 24/7, they walked with Him, talked with Him, saw His miracles, you know, heard His messages, and they still, when the storm came, you know, they can't be 100% faith-filled all the time. You know, it's just, and that's just human nature. You know, it's hard to, you know, I've experienced it myself. You know, it doesn't seem like it matters how close you are to Jesus. You know, when certain things happen, you just, you know, you're not 100% faith-filled, and we need to remember that Jesus was able to rescue them from the storm, and He's able to rescue us from our storms of everyday life too. You know, and that doesn't, you know, it can be sickness, job loss, marriage problems, you know, loss of loved ones, you know, you name it. You know, there's things that we go through, and you know, when Jesus told them to get in the boat and go to the other side, He knew that storm was coming. You know, nothing ever catches Him off guard. You know, he knows what's going on, and He knew exactly what was going to take place, and we know too that we're going to go through storms in our life, and you know, so you know, I've heard it said, you know, that you're either going through a storm, you're getting ready to go through a storm, or you're coming out of a storm. One of those three, and that's kind of right. And it may be little storms, big storms, but you know, it seems like that's kind of the way it goes. But you know, Jesus told us that, you know, to expect trouble. You know, He promised us that He'll be with us in the storm, and He'll never leave us or forsake us. But we're going to go through trouble, and there's going to be trouble, and that's just the way it is. And this passage to me, you know, it not only kind of reveals Jesus's humanity because he was tired and he wanted to go to sleep, and you know, it showed the human side of him, but you know, also, you know, the deity. You know, I mean, he's the guy that says in one quick word, peace. You know, be still, and you know, only God controls the wind and the waves, and you know, because you know, it's just one quick word from Jesus is just, and the storm stops and everything becomes calm. And you know, I can just imagine, you know, being in a hurricane, and you know, 100-mile-an-hour winds, and especially if you're out at sea and at night. You know, they weren't. This was at night, and deep water scares me to death anyway. I want to be able to see the bottom. I don't like the lake. I don't like the ocean. But you know, I can imagine being out there and being in a really bad storm like that you think is going to sink the boat, and all of a sudden, you know, Jesus doesn't get up and hustle around and scream and peace. He just, you know, to me, just peace. You know, just a calm, ordinary voice, and everything just, you know, at a moment. I mean, I couldn't, you know, this. You know, it just shocked the disciples, and it would me too. You know, I mean, that things would, you know, in a second become calm, and the disciples were amazed at this, and you know, this is, you know, ought to be comforting to us, because you know, when we're in a storm, you know, our faith's never misplaced, and if He can calm the storms in the sea, that kind of storm with one word, you know, He can calm the storms in our life too. And I want to look at one other passage here that's always, I've always thought this was it always kind of shocked me when I read this, and I thought this was a kind of a good example of people going through a storm, and it's in 2 Kings 6:24. It starts there, and it's kind of long, but we'll get through it. But it says in 2 Kings 6:24, it says, sometime later, Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, mobilized his army and marched up and laid siege to Samaria. There was a great famine in the city. The siege lasted so long that the donkey's head sold for 80 shekels of silver, and a quarter of a cab of seed pods for 5 shekels. As the king of Israel was passing by the wall, a woman cried to him, help me, my lord, the king. The king replied, if the Lord does not help you, where can I get help for you? From the threshing floor, from the winepress? Then he asked her, what's the matter? She answered, this woman said to me, give up your son so that we may eat him today, and tomorrow we'll eat my son. So we cooked my son and ate him. The next day I said to her, give up your son so we may eat him. But she had hidden him. When the king heard the woman's words, he tore his robes. As he went along the wall, the people looked, and they saw that under his robes he had sackcloth on his body. He said, may God deal with me be ever so severely if the head of Elisha, son of Shaphat, remains on his shoulders today. Now Elijah was sitting in his house, and the elders were sitting with him. The king sent a messenger ahead, but before he arrived, Elisha said to the elders, don't you see how this murderer is sending someone to cut off my head? Look, when the messenger comes, shut the door and hold it shut against him. Is not the sound of the master's footsteps behind him? While he was still talking to him, the messenger came to him, and the king said, this disaster is from the Lord. Why should I wait for the Lord any longer? Elisha replied, hear the word of the Lord. This is what the Lord says, about this time tomorrow, a sheath of the finest flour will sell for a shekel, and 2 sheaths of barley will sell for a shekel at the gate of Samaria. The officer who was whose arm the king was leaning, said to the man of God, "Look, even if the Lord should open the floodgates of heavens, could this happen?" "You will see with your own eyes," answered Elisha, "but you will not eat any of it." Now there were 4 men with leprosy at the entrance of the city gate. They said to each other, "Why stay here until we die? If we say we'll go into the city, the famine is there, and we will die. And if we stay here, we will die. So let's go over to the camp of the Arameans and surrender. If they spare us, we live. If they kill us, then we die." At dusk, they got up and went to the camp of the Arameans. When they reached the edge of the camp, no one was there, for the Lord had caused the Arameans to hear the sound of chariots and horses of a great army. So they said to one another, "Look, the king of Israel has hired the Hittite and Egyptian kings to attack us." So they got up and fled in the dusk and abandoned their tents and their horses and donkeys. They left the camp as it was and ran for their lives. The men who had leprosy reached the edge of the camp, entered one of the tents, and ate and drank. Then they took silver and gold and clothes, and they went off and hid them. They returned and entered another tent and took some things from it and hid them also. Then they said to each other, what we're doing is not right. This is a day of good news, and we are keeping it to ourselves. If we wait until daylight, punishment will overtake us. Let us go at once, report this to the royal palace." So they went and called out to the city gatekeepers and told them, "We went to the Aramean camp, and no one was there, not a sound of anyone, only tethered horses and donkeys, and the tents were just as they were." The gatekeeper shouted the news, and it was reported within the palace. The king got up in the night and said to his officers, "I will tell you what the Arameans have done to us. They know we're starving." So they left the camp and to hide in the countryside, thinking they will surely come out, and then they will take them alive and get into the city. One of the officers answered, "Have some men take 5 of the horses that are left in the city. Their plight will be like that of all the Israelites left here. Yes, they will only be like all the Israelites who are doomed. Let us send them to find out what's happened." So they selected 2 chariots with their horses, and the king sent them after the Aramean army. He commanded the drivers, "Go and find out what has happened." They followed them as far as the Jordan, and they found the whole road strewn with clothing and equipment the Arameans had thrown away in their headlong flight. So the messengers returned and reported to the king. Then the people went out and plundered the camp of the Arameans. So a seah of finest flour sold for a shekel, and 2 seahs of barley sold for a shekel, as the Lord had said. Now the king had put the officer on whose arm he leaned in charge of the gate, and the people trampled him in the gate, and he died, just as the man of God had foretold when the king came down to his house. It happened as the man of God had said to the king, "About this time tomorrow, a seah of finest flour will sell for a shekel, and 2 seahs of barley for a shekel at the gate of Samaria." The officer said to the man of God, "Look, even if the Lord should open the floodgates of heaven, could this happen?" And the man of God had replied, "You will see it with your own eyes, but you will not eat any of it." And that is exactly what happened to him. For the people trampled him in the gateway, and he died. And I always thought, that was always kind of a shock. It always shocks you when you hear, to me, this was going on, and they were eating their own kids. that just, when I read that always think, my gosh. But they laid siege to this city, and these people were starving, and they were going through a storm, and I can't imagine being so hungry that you would eat your own children, and a donkey's head would sell for that kind of money, and they were in such despair that they couldn't even really fathom how God could could save them. You know, I mean, that's the thing that, and especially when Elisha says, he says, this will happen in 24 hours. You know, go from eating your own kids, 24 hours later, you got all the food you want. And that's how, you know, God can, you know, can change things so quick. You know, even in you know, to me, in our country right now, we're in a storm to me, but I have, you know, I have hope that, you know, because I read this and I think, you know, in 24 hours God turned this around. He can do the same thing here, but you know, they, you know, and you know, they just couldn't see how God can, you know, everything. Nothing is impossible with God. You know, it says even if He opened the floodgates of heaven, this guy says, you know, it's almost like they were, and the disciples in the boat, you know, they were like, you know, God, wake up, you know, look at what's happening to us, and you know, we need to always remember that no matter how bad things are, anything's possible with God. And you know, I heard a story about things being impossible. This guy was he was going to the fair, and he was walking to the fair, and he's walking down this dirt road. And he had a pig under one arm, and he had a chicken under the other, and he was holding a basket, and he had 2 pies in the basket that his mom had baked. He was going to enter in the pie contest. So he's walking along, and he walks past this house. This girl is working in the yard, and he asked her, said, "Can you tell me how to get to the fair?" And she says, "Yeah." She said, she walks over to the fence. She said, you know, you go up to this section line road, and you turn down, you walk down this another half a mile, and there's a yellow house. And she was giving him directions, and you know, she said, "It's about 4 miles." And he says, "Well, is there any way that, you know, is there a shortcut somewhere?" She said, "Yeah." She said, "You can cut right through those woods right there, and you know, you probably cut it in half." And he said, "Well, can you give me directions?" She said, "I can't tell you how to get there through those woods." She said, "You'll never find it." And he said, "Well, could you take me? Could you show me?" And she said, "Well," she said, "I don't know about," she said, "if you get me down there in those woods," she said, "you might try to kiss me." And he said, "Kiss you?" He said, "Look," he said, my hands are full. I've got a pig and a chicken." And he said, "That's impossible." He said, I can't." She said, "Well," she said, "I don't know about that." She said, "You could put that chicken down on the ground and put that basket on top of that chicken, put those 2 pies on top of the basket." She said, "I could just hold that pig." So, you know, anything's possible. But you know, we need to remember that you know, when we're going through storms, that storms, you know, they help to make sailors sturdy. They, you know, when trials come upon us, trials help to make Christians stronger in their faith. And you know, if you have a little trouble, you'll have a little faith. But if you have great faith, I mean, you have to expect you're going to have great trouble. And you know, storms can bring repentance. They can grow us spiritually, and God can reveal Himself to us through them. And but you know, remember this, that storms are always temporary, and really everything's temporary. You know, you want to set your mind on things that are eternal. You know, everything we're going through is temporary. It doesn't matter how bad things are. You know, there's going to come a time that, you know, I've heard it said the only thing that are eternal is God's word and men's souls, and you know, that we'll be here forever, and our souls will, and somewhere. but but remember that kind of the key word is that you're going through a storm. You're passing through it. You're not staying in it. It always storms never last, and we just want to kind of remember that no matter how bad things are, that we keep our eyes focused upon God and things that are eternal, and remember that it's all just temporary. So that's all I've got. So.